Tales from the Riverbank, Episode 1, The Great Escape. Has the dream of becoming Director General and owning 2 ponies and a large house in Alderley Edge failed to materialise? Is work a nightmare of repetitive tasks that have no discernible impact on the real world? If so, and you're thinking about giving up your job and going to do something a lot more interesting instead, there are probably a few questions that you might want to ask yourself before completely taking leave of your senses. Like, why am I doing this? In my short but ever-lengthening time on our small planet, I've come to the conclusion that we are quite often motivated by rejection. I don't mean the kind of rejection that leaves you wanting to jump off a bridge because your wife is leaving you for the Hungarian plumber who came to install your new bathroom last summer. I mean the sort of rejection that makes you stop doing something because you don't like it. The sort that makes you walk to the office in your underpants because you're fed up struggling with the button flies of your work trousers every morning, and you just know that if you have to try to slot 6 enormous metal studs through 6 ridiculously small holes one more time, you're going to do something violent enough to get your picture in the Manchester Evening News alongside a caption that reads, "Civil servant in garment factory bloodbath." You didn't choose to abandon your trousers, not really. You just rejected what you could no longer put up with. You didn't stop to think about the alternatives, like your jeans with the zip flies, for example, lying at the bottom of the laundry basket. It was just blind, unreflective, unquestioning refusal. There are some people out there who might call walking through the centre of Manchester in a state of undress because you don't like your trousers anymore doing things for the wrong reasons. I prefer to think of this kind of behaviour as merely rash. But whatever you call it, it's liable to get you into a whole load of trouble. So, before exposing yourself to this kind of danger, my advice, based on hard-won experience, is to stop and think. Perhaps you should wash and iron your clothes more regularly than every 3 months. Maybe that late-night search of your wardrobe wasn't quite as comprehensive as it could have been. Is there a sale on at H&M? Reject the button flies by all means if you want. Reject trousers altogether, but do it calmly, sensibly, and as the Archdeacon used to say, preparedly. That way, when you're handing your resignation letter into your line manager and she asks you why you're not wearing anything more than a khaki loincloth, you can tell her proudly that you're going to join the circus. What I'm saying, in a rather roundabout way admittedly, is don't do what we did. Don't give up work, sell your house and move to France simply because you're fed up taking orders from pygmies. This is a rejection. This is negative. In The Great Escape, it needs to be more than a disliking for prison food, suffocating proximity to people who you would normally cross the road to avoid, and an overwhelming sense of absolute futility. Heady cocktail though collectively these things may be, you need a positive. You need to be going somewhere better, not just running away. And that's not all. You also need a plan. A watertight, well-advised wizard plan. Because if you've got nothing lined up after you come out of the tunnel on the other side of the perimeter fencing, you're likely to get picked up a long time before you get to Switzerland. Another good question then is, what am I going to live on? Because it's very likely, if our own experience is anything to go by, that the positive reason you chose for throwing in the towel doesn't have any financial return associated with it. You may be surprised to know that activities such as spending more time with the dog or wandering through your local vineyard at sunset don't actually attract a fee. Nothing. Not a ruble, not even a kopeck. So what, as Lenin put it, faced with an entirely different problem, is to be done? A possible solution that you might like to consider before swapping your comfortable existence for a cardboard box and a squeegee is linked to your nationality. One of the many advantages of being English, it says here, is that there is an unquenchable thirst for our language. People all over the world are lapping it up in huge quantities. Easy enough then to roll up at a local language school with your passport and 25-metre swimming certificate and demand a job in the teaching profession. And as a complete change from the bureaucratic grind, what could be more enjoyable and less taxing than helping a room full of foreigners learn the correct use of the present perfect, or how to ask for a milkshake in Canal Street, or funnier still, how to pronounce the word 13th. Easy. But in return for being a doddle, TEFL, teaching English for love, TESOL, teaching English Saturday lunchtime, or even as those irreverent Americans call it, TESOL, teaching English to sweet old ladies, enjoys the lowest status of all forms of employment and is remunerated at a rate which is illegal within the European Union. This comes as a bit of a shock if your previous job allowed you to afford some of the luxuries in life, like food and somewhere to live. The other thing about teaching English is that you have to reconcile yourself to one of those awful, incontrovertible truths that crop up from time to time. Nobody has ever learned English sitting in a classroom. It's impossible. Whatever you do, none of your students will ever make any progress. Ever. And unless you get used to this idea as early as possible, you'll have a breakdown. The next question you might want to ask yourself, now that you've determined how you're going to be able to afford the occasional loaf of bread and glass of water, is where am I going to live? Everybody, or at least its original inhabitants, will tell you that France is the best country in the world to live in. Nowhere else can boast the same variety and quality of wine, cheese and dangerous driving. Forget Spain, forget Florida, France is the #1 destination for English civil servants on the run. But as anybody whose experience of France extends beyond a Boulogne supermarket can tell you, not everything is straightforward in the Jardin d'Eden. For a start, not everybody understands English, however loud you shout. Many French people can only speak an obscure language they call français, which even has a little squiggle under the C to underline just how peculiar their form of communication is. It's not just the language either. You'll need to adapt to all sorts of things if you're going to live on the wrong side of the channel. For example, you'll need to revise your view of the centrality of the consumer in society. In Anglo-Saxon countries, our perspective is based on the following model. You buy something, it doesn't work. You take it back to the shop, you get your money back. In France, they have a different model entirely. You buy something, it doesn't work, you take it back to the shop. The shop assistant shouts at you and you leave without a refund. This takes some getting used to. Fortunately, another gift afforded to us by the happy geographical accident of our birth is adaptability. But where to live in France, though? It's a big country, much bigger even than Manchester. There are really only two ways of deciding where exactly you're going to pitch your tent. You can either use the scientific method, as we did, by sticking a pin in the map, or you can spend months on the internet comparing regional house prices. I suspect, though, despite what I was saying earlier about planning, if you're the kind of person for whom the value of your property is the single most important element in your life, and I think you know who you are, you probably shouldn't be doing this anyway. No, the pin map approach, even if it is a little bit dangerous if both of you are blindfolded and you've had a bottle of wine each, is the best way to decide. But be flexible, to stick to your first pinprick if this happened to be up a mountain and miles from any employment opportunities. In our case, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, having exhausted our supplies of Band-Aid, we finally managed to get the pin close enough to Bordeaux to be able to say, "So, Bordeaux it is." At this stage, if you've been in the Scouts or toured the Middle East on active duty, you'll want to reconnoitre. If you've somehow managed to get to 40 without any kind of military training, you'll probably simply want to visit. If, on the other hand, you've hit middle age having learned nothing, you'll just turn up in Bordeaux with all your furniture in the back of a van. While we're on the subject of vans, furniture and a 1,500-kilometre round trip, a good tip is to persuade your brother to share the driving. which then leaves you free to spend the whole journey curled up asleep in the passenger seat. The principal advantage of the advanced exploration of your intended habitat becomes apparent during your hunt for a new roof over your head. A little pied-à-terre you can call chez nous. Who said learning French was difficult? Having toured all the available properties for rent then, and narrowed your choice down to the only thing you'll be able to afford, you're faced with a very tricky issue that essentially revolves around the relationship between your income and the rent. I don't know about everybody else, but I feel quite strongly that being forced to demonstrate that you can pay the rent by showing the landlord a copy of your employment contract when quite clearly you don't have a job yet is something in between very picky and downright impossible. But that's how it is, and no amount of swearing loudly in English is going to change it. Without a job, your only option is to put the equivalent of a year's rent in a frozen French bank account that pays a risible level of interest, which predictably is equivalent to the fee the bank charges you for providing this service. Brilliant. Another victory in the banking sector's war against the common man. Had we known this would be the case, we could have avoided a lot of toing and froing and a lightning visit to the NatWest in Portland Street. Planning, you see, very useful. There are lots of other questions concerning many of the things that make your current life difficult to contemplate leaving, but which are, at the same time, probably the very things you would like to escape from. Pension payments, healthcare plans, elderly relatives who require 24-hour medical care, your children, a full English breakfast, your Old Trafford season ticket, lots of them, all twinkling with varying degrees of intensity depending on your individual situation and where united are at the table. But the final question you would perhaps be advised to mull over without fail, as you project an image of yourself dozing naked in the privacy of the balcony of your new Bordeaux apartment with a copy of Murphy's English Grammar in Use open on your lap, is, am I happy? And if before you're able to answer the question, this idyllic picture is interrupted by whoops of laughter coming from a group of elderly people with binoculars on the roof of the retirement home opposite, think carefully about what you might be escaping to. Are you sure you're not just exchanging one bad dream for another? Whatever you decide to do, however and wherever you decide to do it, think long and hard before you go ahead and jump. Plan, research, visit, and avoid getting caught with your trousers down.